Hey guys, this is Dave with Audio Win, and within this massive box is the Elysian Pilgrim Noir. Now, I know I'm a little late with this review, but I had to take a trip out of state, and I've been playing catch up ever since I got back. And I actually took these with me on that trip along with the original Pilgrim and several other IEMs kind of within this price range for comparison, including the IE600, the Xuanwu Gate, SA6 MK2, and a few others. So, of course, I'm going to share my impressions and thoughts on the sound of the Noir, but there also seems to be a larger question within the community regarding its pricing and whether the improvements justify the increased cost over the original Pilgrim. So first, I'll just share my sound impressions, but then towards the end, I'll also want to talk about whether or not I feel that the additional cost is justified. In any case, as usual, we'll go over what's included in the box first. We'll talk about the specifications, the design, and then we'll get into the sound. We have a lot to talk about, so let's get started. Included in the box are the IEMs and cable. They've also included a nice black velvety textured case, a small assortment of ear tips, and these are the SpinFit W1s, which just happen to be some of my favorite tips, and then a cleaning tool. So the original Pilgrim is priced at $399, and with the Noir, we're jumping all the way up to $799, so they've doubled the price. Now, again, I'm gonna save the big question of is that increase justified for later, but I do want to at least talk about some of the physical improvements they've made with the cable and also with the internals of the IEMs themselves, because it's not just the tuning that is different. So the driver configuration is basically the same as the original. It's still one dynamic driver and three balanced armature drivers, but they have upgraded the crossover from a three-way to a four-way. They've also upgraded the internal wiring inside the IEMs to bespoke effect audio internal wiring, and that can be significant. But one of the key upgrades, according to Elysian, is that now the Noir uses what is referred to as the Hypercore Twin Thrust Module, which apparently is designed to reduce distortion and also reduce unwanted resonance. And that supposedly results in a more refined mid-range presentation. And since this is a collaboration with Effect Audio, they've also paired the Noir with a customized version of the Aros S cable, which is normally gray, but for the Noir, they created this matte black version. So you can only get this black version, as far as I understand, of the Aros S with the Pilgrim Noir. And another kind of cool feature is that this cable works with Effect Audio's Termex and Connex system. So you can change out the terminations for either a 3.5, 2.5, or 4.4. And then you can also change out the connectors at the earpiece side for either an MMCX or a 2-pin in case you want to use this cable with a pair of 2-pin IEMs. Now, I should point out that if you purchase the Noir, this cable only comes with either a 4.4 or 3.5, which you would choose at checkout. And if you want the optional terminations or changeable 2-pin connectors, you have to purchase those separately. It just so happens I happen to own them because I have several other Effect Audio cables. So that's all great, but aside from that, it's actually just a really nice cable. It's super good looking, it's soft, it's manageable, and it actually does look and feel like an upgraded cable. And I really don't know if I can confidently say whether or not the cable is worth whatever cost was added, but I can tell you it is a very nice cable, and it looks pretty sick with these IEMs as well. Speaking of which, the new color scheme looks stunning. I love the all black aesthetic with the gold accents, and with the black Arrows cable and the black case, it just really makes for an overall very sleek and very classy looking package. Okay, let's move on to the sound. Okay, so what I'm gonna do is, of course, focus on the sound of the Noir, but at the same time, I want to compare it with the original, so I'll kind of be jumping back and forth between the two. So the original Pilgrim kind of rides that line between U-shape and neutral as far as the tuning. So there is an emphasis on the treble and the sub bass, and then the upper mid-range is a little more relaxed, and that's kind of Elysian's house tuning, and they took a similar approach with the tuning of the Diva as well. Now, the original Pilgrim does lean just a little bright to me, although it's not really an issue. It's just something that falls a little outside of my tuning preference. And I guess if I had to sum up the presentation of the original Pilgrim, I would probably describe it as engaging and fun, but still refined and controlled. And with a Noir, you basically get the same thing, but it's just a little more refined. Plus, it also avoids introducing any of that brightness or sharpness into its presentation. So it's still riding that line between neutral and V-shape, but the upper mids and lower treble have a little more of a refined, maybe relaxed presentation. And I don't know how much of this added refinement is attributable to these small tuning adjustments and how much is attributable to the upgrades on the hardware side as far as the upgraded internal wiring and such. But I do know there are noticeable improvements, not just in its tuning over the original, but also in its detail levels as well. As to whether or not these improvements are worth an extra $400, well, I'm not so sure, but let's go ahead and break things down a little further, and then we'll kind of circle back to that question again towards the end. We'll start with the bass. So like the original Pilgrim, the bass is more sub-bass focused, and it's also very similar in regards to its energy, the bass energy, again, kind of riding that line between fun and neutral. So there is maybe a little bit of a bass boost, but it's not anywhere close to what I would consider to be at bass head levels. I guess depending on what kind of bass head you are, but for me personally, I don't think these are bass head levels. It's still going to give you a little more of a polite and slightly more reserved or controlled presentation, in my opinion. Now, speaking of control, this dynamic driver is pretty incredible because you kind of get the best of both worlds. You have the dynamics, the punch, and that physicality that you want in a dynamic driver, but you also get good speed and control, which I have to point out isn't very common, especially in this price range. And that's one of the things that I feel like kind of separates the better dynamic drivers from the average ones. And they've also tuned it well because, like the original, the Noir offers very good bass separation, so you don't run into any issues with bass bleed. Now, as to whether I would consider the bass of the Noir an upgrade over the original, not really. Not that the Noir's bass isn't excellent, it is. It's just that the original Pilgrim's bass is exceptional for its $400 asking price. Now, the mid-range is where we start seeing a little more of an obvious difference in tunings between the Noir and the original, starting with the lower mids. So the original is what I would consider to be a little on the warm side, but again, it does not affect its low mid-range or mid-range detail at all. And the Noir essentially does the same thing. It brings some warmth and richness, and it actually brings even a little more warmth into the picture, which I prefer quite a bit over the original. So it has a little more of a weighty presentation and just a little more of a rich presentation than the original. But what I love is that they still managed to avoid causing any bass bleed. So you have that added slightly fuller bodied sound, but you still also have nice amounts of low mid detail, and combined with the mid bass texture, it really makes for a very tactile and just a physical bass experience. And then as you move into the upper mids, that energy does pick up, and while the upper mid and lower treble energy are quite similar between the Noir and the original, the Noir somehow, again, it avoids introducing any of that brightness or sharpness that I noticed in the original. And I also feel like the Noir comes off as maybe a little more natural in its vocal and instrument presentation. And even more interesting is that despite the slightly smoother presentation, it actually manages to sound a little more resolving and brings just a little more detail in the picture. Not much, but a little. And all of that carries through into the treble as well. It's just a little smoother. It brings a little more detail. It sounds just a little more natural. And again, it doesn't introduce any sharpness or brightness, but still has very good energy overall. And because of how they tuned the treble and the upper mids, and how that plays off of the bass levels, I also feel like the Noir strikes me as maybe a little more balanced than the original as well. Now, as far as the technical performance of the Noir, there is an improvement in the overall detail levels over the original, but the soundstage width is about the same to me. And I didn't really notice much of a difference as far as imaging and layering either, which is actually fine. It's not really a big deal because the original does all of those things exceptionally well. It's just that it's not very common to see technicalities at that level within this $400 price range. Now, as far as comparisons, this is where things get a little tricky, and I'll go ahead and address the subject of value here as well. So in my comparisons with the original, most of the areas where I prefer the Noir over the original are in some of the minor tuning tweaks. So I prefer its slightly fuller bodied mid-range, and I felt like the upper mids and the lower treble not only sound, again, just a little more natural, but they also do a really good job at avoiding introducing any brightness or sharpness into its presentation like the original. And that results in a slightly more relaxed presentation with the Noir, and that appeals to me more. So that's on the tuning side. Now, on the technical side, while I did feel like the Noir is a little more resolving and maybe brings a touch more detail into the picture, I didn't really notice any other improvements as far as soundstage, imaging, and layering. So I'm just going to tackle the big question right now, and that is, do I feel like those differences and those incremental improvements justify doubling the price? And I'm strictly talking about sound performance right now, so I'm not taking into consideration the upgraded cable or the aesthetic improvements. So do I think the Noir sounds like an $800 IM? Well, no, but I do think it competes within this $600 to $700 price range, and I do think there is justification for a price increase. I just don't know if I would have doubled the price. To me, this is competing directly with the i600, Schwanwu Gate, which those are some of the best sets I've heard in this price range. As a matter of fact, I actually prefer the tuning of the Noir over the IE600 because while the IE600 is still one of my absolute favorite V-shaped tuned sets and has ridiculous technical chops, the Noir actually lands a little closer to my personal tuning preference. But the IE600 is only $700, and you can probably even find them for $600 on some websites. Now, my other favorite IEM around the $600 to $700 price range is the Schwanwu Gate, which is priced at $650 because it was the first IEM to come along that actually kind of wowed me and that I preferred over the IE600. I did feel like the IE600 did or does have a little better technical performance, but the Schwanwu Gate didn't fall far behind, and I actually prefer the tuning of the Schwanwu Gate over the IE600. And now we have the Noir, which in terms of technical performance is basically on par with the Schwanwu Gate. The Schwanwu Gate might have just a tad more treble detail, but in the end, what it came down for me, between these two, the Schwanwood Gate and the Noir, was the tuning. And if I'm being honest, it was really tough to choose because each of these have characteristics that I like a lot. But at the end of the day, I think I would be more likely to reach for the Noir over the Schwanwood Gate. So what that means in short is that of all of the IMs that I have or I've heard within this price range right now, the Noir is my favorite. However, I do wish they would have priced it a little bit lower, probably closer to the $600 to $700 price point. And I think I'm just gonna leave it there. So that concludes my review of the Elysian Pilgrim Noir. Thanks so much for taking the time to watch. If you like my content, please take a second and hit that subscribe button. Also, if you would please like this video, please share this video. I hope you guys have an awesome day.